Well, I think we can start. And starting with them up there set up. I hope there'll be plenty because there's always some people who can't quite make it at time. Emily Bowman is a sociology professor at Coe College. And she and several Coe College students are going to discuss social inequities around us this morning. Professor Bowman has studied social justice. She is a strong advocate, I understand. Part of the chair told me, somebody over at Coe told me, for social justice and particularly on gender, race, and cultural issues. She's going to introduce her students, or co-students, maybe not so much her students, who will tell us what injustices they are angry about and would like to change. Professor?
All right. Thank you. Thanks for having us. Thank you. It's kind of odd that I get the top billing because I'm not really going to be doing anything today. I have put all the pressure on the students for today, so I'll introduce them. What I'm hoping to do is, I know generally the presentation lasts about a half an hour so that there's plenty of time for discussion. And so, as you can see, I brought 3 students today, and each of them is prepared to talk for about 15 minutes. Not 15 minutes, sorry, 10 minutes. And my hope is that we can then hold the questions until the end after all 3 of them have had a chance to speak. That way we make sure that we get through all the presentations. So obviously if there's a question for a point of clarification, feel free to dive in with that. But in terms of discussion, I'm hoping we can hold that to the end. So, all right, so as Ron sort of suggested, I was trying to get some of my sociology majors here, but I guess, the morning was just a little too rough for them. But so I have some of Coe's best students here with me today. So I'll introduce them by way of the order that they'll be going. So first we have Alex Boyd, and Alex is a double major in math and creative writing. He'll be speaking first. And then are you next? Yes, Leanne Ulrich is next. Leanne is majoring in English and Spanish. And then last but not least, we have Paulina Harrison, who is majoring in French and creative writing. All right. And so I'll just let Alex take it away. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm Alex, and as a member of the queer community myself, one of the things that makes me most angry about the world is this association we make between the LGBT community and mental health struggles, so depression, anxiety, suicidality, and such. So just taking a look at statistics for a minute, basically we can see that 38.2% of straight people suffer from some kind of major depression, while almost double, 71.4% of LGBT people suffer from that same types of depression. Going further, suicide, 4.6% of people attempt suicide overall in our country. 10 to 20% of lesbian, gay, and bisexual people attempt suicide. And 41% of transgender people attempt suicide. So literally 10 times. And then one other kind of side note, a little bit different, but substance abuse is another thing that I'm always looking at, that 9% of the general population has some kind of substance abuse, drugs, alcohol, etc., while 20 to 30%, hard to know exactly, LGBT people suffer from that. So I'm going to use the word queer a lot, but know that queer is just synonymous with LGBT. It's not a derogatory term, it's just something that the communities claim as an umbrella term to refer to us all. So I'm basically going to start with looking at what makes these rates so high. So we all know that coming out is a big part of an LGBT person's life. And it's an inherent, just universal risk, basically, with youth today. And the problem here is that it doesn't matter whether or not they do come out or whether or not they are accepted, because they're raised to have this kind of uncertainty about whether they're going to be accepted, whether there's going to be intolerance. So no matter what, whether they're going to be accepted by everyone they come out to, there's some kind of inherent risk that they may lose their home, they may lose their friends, family, And more importantly, it's an ongoing process. There's never an end to coming out. So when you say like before coming out, no. It's always before coming out. There's always someone new you're gonna meet, always someone new that you have to come out to and make aware of that identity, or not and feel hidden in some way. And this is what leads most queer people to either depend on chosen family, so friends. In college, you see that a lot, where they start to build connections and stop relying on family because they really can't, whether they're not out or maybe they've been kicked out of their home. And sometimes that even leads them to abuse substances and things, unfortunately. One of the other huge indicators of why this keeps happening over and over again with every generation is that there's also this lack of media representation overall. We don't see queer people on like major television shows very often. Major bestsellers, it's not very often we see those. It is expanding, of course. Things are changing constantly. But there can really never be enough to just fully instill that idea that we can be comfortable queer people instead of being depressed or suicidal queer people. So the US, just going off of this briefly, the US has this culture of self-discovery, and we always need to find people like ourselves. We need to learn about ourselves by finding others like ourselves. And that's where this lack of representation doesn't allow queer people to do that. Of course, we are addressing these issues pretty strongly nowadays. We have, of course, marriage equality this summer, which was huge. We have these conversations that are even made just speaking about it today. It's not as much of a taboo as it ever was before. People are talking about it all the time. The word queer gets used on the daily all over a college campus, and I don't think 20 years ago even it would have been. And like I said, media representation is drastically expanding just even day by day. There's more and more trans people. Shows like Orange is the New Black, Glee, like these are huge shows that like millions and millions watch around this country. And then we also have that really basic like way of helping people out, which is like trans and LGBT hotlines and things for those people who are really just at their rock bottom. And we have like things like the It Gets Better campaign that really have saved children's lives in drastic ways. But I think there has been a drastic misperception of the real kind of concrete progress we have made. Namely, marriage equality was a huge step forward for some LGBT people. Basically, those gay men, lesbians, those are the people it really helped out, but the problem is that marriage and queer community like progress, they're not synonymous. There are plenty of queer people who could have been married 30 years ago. There are trans people who, especially, or bi people, or just there are all these identities that marriage was never really a factor in them. Or maybe they didn't want to get married, it just wasn't part of the equation. Maybe it was, they just weren't interested in that like long-term commitment. And representation, media representation in general, continues to be mainly negative. I mean, you see that gay teen represented in a movie day after day. You see that struggling, closeted adult man who's married to a wife that he, feels uncomfortable with, and, that kind of story that just, it gives this perception that we're all suffering in some way. And often these movies even end just so drastically as a suicide at the end. And it's nothing that people really kind of like wave their finger at or anything. It's just kind of what it is. Like that's kind of what's expected. Or if they don't have some kind of instant of depression throughout the movie, it's almost confusing to people at this point. So what we're essentially doing by having this kind of representation out there is telling youth that this is what they're up against. This is what they're going to have to deal with, and I mean, you should really just expect it. You should be all ready to be depressed and find those people who you can hopefully reach out to and really, hopefully get through it, basically. And this kind of perception that they do need to prepare, this idea that we need to prepare them, it sounds like it's a progressive, helpful idea, But in actuality, it's building this culture of depression among the queer community. It's building this environment where, exactly what I just said, that people are just expecting to be depressed, expecting to be, at one point, considering suicide. And even what's problematic to me is that even me speaking today is a perpetuation of this idea. Every time someone speaks about it is a perpetuation of the idea that people should be suicidal and depressed just for being queer, LGBT, etc. So one thing that I always look at is the It Gets Better campaign. It was great. It really did save people's lives. I know personally people who would not have gotten through what they did without seeing those messages from all these people around the world, and just it was a really effective campaign. But the actual phrasing of "it gets better" implies that there was something wrong to begin with, that there was something bad already happening. So I always couldn't see why it can't just be worded as "it's great," and if it's not, it will be soon. And it's that kind of positivity that doesn't exist right now, even now when we have this marriage equality, all these things going on. The other drastic thing that people aren't addressing is this 25 to 30% of queer people who aren't depressed, who are very comfortable in themselves, or at least are okay enough that they're not, they're living through their life in some more comfortable way. We're giving them one of two messages, essentially. We're telling them either you're different and I'm confused, like why aren't you depressed? Because this is what you're supposed to be doing. And it's just constantly instilling that in them. So it's like almost just this ongoing battle of they have to like trudge through these like expectations that people have them, that they're going to be struggling. Or what I've seen more often is that it completely alienates them from the rest of the queer community. There is no reason for them to be a part of this depressing culture. That's what the way they see it. They see it as the only reason they would get involved with the other queer people is if they were like romantically involved, instead of realizing that there are some happier queer people and that we're making progress. And it's just a very negative outlook on the whole situation. So it results in, for example, me, I'm a queer person who has gone through most of these things and has, yes, worked through it and become empowered by it, but has still experienced those things, and it has drastically affected my life. It means that I'm talking about it constantly because I want to break these barriers down, break all these taboos down, and just end this kind of association that we make. And it makes, I have a friend that I made this summer that he identifies as a gay man entirely, very, very comfortable with it. But he won't identify with the queer community. He won't go out with the queer community in the slightest because he just doesn't want to be around sad people. And that's the only way he can see it. So in short, this small community already that's 10, 15, whatever percentage you want to use of the entire country becomes even more divided. Amongst all these identities, it become even more divided, and there's just not much of us to kind of support each other by the end of it. So looking kind of concretely how to solve these kinds of things, it's tough, needless to say, because like I said, even me like talking about it is part of the problem in some way, in my opinion. But it stems from that idea. I mean, one of the easiest things is to think about coming out and how, of course, support them. Of course, like support, whoever comes out, whether it's a family member, a friend, a person you just randomly met on the street, like whoever it is that you just happen to come across this situation, just support them, express like encouragement. But even before that, we need to start breaking down these expectations so that before they can even develop these kinds of mental health struggles, this depression and suicidality, because these things develop far before coming out in most cases. We need to start just developing that expectation that people can be okay whether they're gay, straight, bi, whatever. People can be suicidal no matter what they are. And there's no indicator just because of your identity. And it's really just about making sure that we don't make assumptions overall, because this coming out process can be like such a hard thing in the first place, but to also have that assumption that they might be struggling and then all these like, do you need to go see a counselor, like a therapist, all these things. Maybe they're just comfortable, and to present that idea that they can be, that they can be okay with just being comfortable with who they are truly is one of the most important things. And yeah, it's just about bringing that happier representation. I mean, if you really look for it, there are some happy queer people represented in movies and TV, but it's only if you really look at it and look for it, and a 10-year-old can't really find much of it. A 12-year-old even can't find it. It doesn't really become until you get to college that you can really have that kind of agency and really find that kind of representation. So we kind of need to start showing them that, basically, from raising them. Okay, thank you.
Okay, good morning, friends. Like Professor Bowman said, my name is Leanne Ulrich. I'm an English and Spanish major at Coe College, and I am a senior. And I want to talk with you about this morning a little bit about the way we as U.S. citizens approach immigration and some of the faults that we may have. You might be wondering how I, a white girl from a white middle-class family in a white small town in Iowa, became interested in immigration as a topic, and that's a valid question. I can sort of trace this back to my Spanish education. When I began my Spanish education in high school, I started volunteering at Justice for Our Neighbors. It's a free legal immigration clinic here in Cedar Rapids that helps immigrations with their immigration cases. So I was volunteering there doing some minimal intake paperwork, some basic Spanish translation, and during this volunteering I sort of learned two things. The first thing I learned is that our immigration laws are a mess. I was watching these seasoned lawyers counterintuitively struggle through this maze, searching for loopholes, and to me, it seems sort of inefficient and illogical that even our lawyers are struggling to figure out how to best serve the populations. So that's the first thing I learned, is that something has got to give. And the second thing I learned is that I have so much to learn. Here I was helping immigrants, but these people helped me and taught me so much in understanding my position in the world, adding richness and diversity to my life, and I was only volunteering with them once a month. So I was getting all of this out of this experience, and so I was sort of searching for another way to connect with this population. So I landed a job at the Catherine McCauley Center as their part-time education program coordinator. And for those of you who don't know, the Catherine McCauley Center is actually right up the road. It's a nonprofit that works teaching English to immigrants and refugees here in Cedar Rapids. So as such, I interact on a daily basis with these populations. And let me tell you, there are a whole lot of things that make me angry. So these are some statistics about immigrants in Iowa. And the first thing that I'd like to say is that while policy is a huge issue here, laws really do dictate lives. For the purpose of this discussion, I'd like to focus on our faults and failures on a community and an individual level in order to be more productive. So the first thing I'd sort of like to base on is this myth that immigrants take more than they give. There's this whole idea that we're minimizing and challenging immigrants and criminalizing the immigrants themselves. So one of the ways we do this is through a numbers argument, this whole idea that immigrants are just here to mooch off of welfare, they don't pay taxes, they just want to use our school, all of our infrastructure that we offer. And that is downright untrue. If you look at some of these statistics, the amount of business income that is generated by immigrants is $216 million in Iowa alone. Undocumented immigrants, so just the undocumented immigrant population, pays $64.1 million in taxes. And the fact is that if we were to get rid of immigrants, like some political figures may suggest, we would actually be losing money as a nation. So that whole argument is basically bunk. And the second thing that we forget is that on a community level, they add so much richness and diversity. I know for myself, in addition to the things that I learn every day about culture and my position in the world, there are direct things that I learn. I learn how to make empanadas from some of my students. I take weekly Arabic lessons from another one of my students. So we forget the ways in which these immigrants are really contributing to our communities. The second thing is that there's this whole argument about why aren't you doing this the right way? Like, are you being lazy? One of these is like, why can't you just learn English? I don't know if any of you have ever tried to learn another language. I have. It's difficult. I don't know if any of you have tried to learn another language while adjusting to an entirely new culture without your normal support systems, while trying to provide for your family and having limited resources to learn that English. that's also really difficult. So criminalizing them and totally minimizing their challenges is just unhelpful and untrue. I think the second part of this is that we're constantly criminalizing them, saying, well, why can't you do this the legal way? Like, why can't you come in the legal way? Why can't you follow the rules? And this is also inaccurate. Like I referred to earlier, this often isn't feasible. The laws are really complex. They're constantly shifting. Even our immigration lawyers have trouble figuring out the best way to do this. With that said, sometimes it isn't feasible, even if you want to do it the legal way. Especially in countries from South America, the waiting list and the process takes extremely long. It can take years to get your paperwork through. And so for people who are experiencing extreme hardship, have children, staying for a few years waiting for your paperwork to go through the bureaucracy just isn't an option. So that's the first thing that makes me angry, is when we minimalize people's struggles. And this often leads into harmful stereotypes, which is my second big complaint. This idea that even if you aren't blatantly anti-immigrant, the stereotypes that you have in your head, the way you try to put these people in a box, is really harmful for everyone. Not all immigrants are poor. Not all immigrants are uneducated. Not all immigrants are criminals, and not all immigrants are Mexicans. I work with this population every day, and I can tell you that we have accountants from Rwanda, we have civil engineers from Syria, but we also have refugees from Bhutan who have never picked up a pen, and single mothers from Guatemala. And when you reduce this entire population to a single identity, to a single stereotype, that doesn't serve anyone. And that's not to say that we should value people of less education less. They still have so much to offer, but this idea of putting everybody in a box helps no one. So finally, I'd like to talk a little bit about the way we distance ourselves from immigrants. We say, oh, this doesn't really have relevance in my life. This isn't really a problem for me. I don't know how to relate to this. And I think most of us forget that many of us had immigrants or ancestors who were immigrants. If you look back to the 19th century, the influx of European immigrants in the United States, if you even just look at Cedar Rapids, the huge Czech population that we have here, it's still very relevant. I think with the exception of Native Americans, most of us can trace back and find at least one immigrant ancestor in our lineage. And we have to remember that there were people that helped our ancestors along the way. And I think our identity as US American citizens really is conducive to helping those people too. The second argument that sort of ties along to that is this idea that, like, oh, well, there's really no diversity here, right? Like, I don't know where these people are, I don't know where to find them. And the truth is that you're making those populations invisible. Like I alluded to earlier, these people are here. As you can see with these statistics, there's almost 150,000 immigrants in Iowa alone. As I alluded to in the previous slide, 13% of our population in the United States is immigrants. So by saying like, well, I'm in Iowa, they're not here, that's not true. I can help you find them. So I'd sort of like to give you an anecdote to illustrate this. Everything I've been talking about from when I was volunteering at the Justice for Our Neighbors clinic. One day I walked in and I was assigned to work with a man from Uganda who had had the fortune to be college educated. So I'm sitting with this man working through his paperwork, and we have this 15-minute discussion about karmic justice and karma and what that means. And so we're using like 4-syllable words, and we're going really in depth, and this man is an immigrant, and I'm learning from him. And I finish up with him, we finish up with a lawyer, and so I'm walking around the room, and I walk by this family at a table, and these little girls say, "Me gustas tus botas," like, I really like your boots. And so I'm like, oh, well, thanks. So I sit down with them, and it's this family, I believe, from Colombia. And I'm talking with these girls, I think they're 13 or 14, while their parents are getting help from the immigration lawyers. And we're just having this wonderful little chat. You know, these girls are asking me about where I got my boots, and do I have a boyfriend, all these very typical conversations that you would have with somebody a few years younger than you. And I was all excited because my Spanish was working and things seemed to be going well. I was connecting with these people and I was so excited. And so I was wrapping up this conversation and I was asked to go make some copies in the copy room. And I was working with a volunteer who had helped them fill out their paperwork. And she was telling me that these young girls had gotten involved dating a drug dealer in Colombia. And as a result, one of the girls had broken it off with one of these guys, and their family had begun to receive death threats. One of their cousins was actually killed, another had been tortured, and so this mother had left with her children. to save their lives. And they had come up all the way up through Mexico, which is a really arduous journey. Often there's a ton of exploitation, and they had made it here and they were safe. And I had missed the lawyer telling them that they were going to get sent back because they had not entered initially legally. So one takeaway from that, you can have conversations with these people about normal things. You do have a ton in common. You can talk about boots. You can talk about significant others. You can laugh. You can struggle along with broken language skills. And second, we are not serving these people. So I want to leave you with a few things that you can do if this makes you angry too. So first thing, while this discussion has been mostly on an individual community level, this is a national issue. So I would encourage you to vote. Vote for people who support and will advocate for comprehensive immigration reform. And don't vote for people who say they will build walls. I'll leave it at that. Second, try to rewire your brain against these stereotypes. If you find yourself interacting with these people, putting them in a box, take a second. Think about it. Think about what you're doing. And try it again. And step in if you're finding other people that are using these stereotypes. And then finally, volunteer, be active. There are so many ways in the community that you can make a difference. As I alluded to earlier, I work at the Catherine McCauley Center. We currently have a waiting list of 90 people in the area who want to learn English. And we work totally on a volunteer tutor basis. So if you're interested in that, I can register you for the next tutor orientation after this forum. You can come find me. But if you find your time a little scarce, you can always just donate. Whether it's monetarily, I know food and diapers are always a big thing, winter coats, especially during this season, are a big thing as well. So in conclusion, the amount of ambivalence, misconceptions, and downright animosity that some US citizens harbor towards immigrants is unfathomable to me. And I think that we as US Americans have this identity where we're supposed to be the melting pot, the haven for the tired, huddled masses. And I feel that we have severely strayed from our forefathers' vision for us. So I really hope that you'll join me in counteracting these negative attitudes. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everybody. So if you see me going like this a lot, I get very sweaty hands. So yeah. Okay, so my name is Paulina Harrison. I am Mexican American, and my parents actually are immigrants from Mexico, oddly enough. I have a large family, but we're not all Mexicans. What else? Oh, I'm a creative writing and French major. I've been taking French for 16 years, and so I'm pretty fluent in it. And what makes me mad is essentially the lack of representation of people of color in TV and film. I'm going to be focusing more on TV, just because the statistics were easier to look at. Yeah, I don't know. I guess we'll go with that. So essentially, right here we have statistics that I found. There were a large number of them, but I stuck to broadcast TV for 2011. And so this is lead actor by race. And so as we can see, 94% of lead actors by race on broadcast TV from 2011 has been 94% white, 5.1% POC, and that's people of color and or minority, whichever term you prefer. I prefer people of color just because there's the word minor in minority, so it makes us feel less important. So minority cast share. This is essentially if 10% or less of the cast is a person of color. Something just fell. Oh, whoops. Okay, there it is. So if 10% or less of the cast is a person of color, then that is 23% of shows that offer that. And then 51% or more of the cast is people of color. That is only 2% of the shows that we have today. This is a more updated list with a more comprehensive breakdown. And so this is diversity TV show regulars, meaning they recur in multiple episodes. And so we have 77% is white, 11% is black, 6% is Asian, 5% is Latin, Latino, Latina, gender nonconforming also included. And then 2% other, so that would be Native American, Romani, any other identification. And so this is my last, probably saddest quote that I found was, this is for movies, however. And so this is likelihood of winning an Oscar by person of color cast share. So if there was 10% or less of the cast had people of color, there was a 6% chance of winning. If 11 to 20% of the cast was of color, there's a 7% chance of winning. We're getting up there, guys. And then if it's up to 30% of the cast, then there was an 8% chance of winning. But if you went beyond that, there was absolutely no chance you were going to win. So, alrighty. So, here are a few key terms that I'll probably be referring to. I'll just be mentioning them, so if you have any questions, they're like right here. So, essentially why this matters is that the issue with having very little representation is that we always build our world and ideologies around the things that we see, and so specifically stories, and this can be in the form of books or movies or plays or whatever. And so what we have available is very limited, and so that tends to create stereotypes and generalizations about people of color, and it's hard to break that unless you live in a place that is very heavily populated with people of color. And even then, it's hard to break those stereotypes because we're always bombarded with the same images. So having a variety of stories can effectively dismantle this to a certain extent, and it can help with not being stereotyped and whatnot. So where was I going now? Oh yeah, so the shows would effectively show that we're not all the same. There are some generalizations made about Mexicans according to TV, and that's very hard to find because there are so few of us. So there's usually the young girls will be pregnant, will be uneducated, will be unilingual in terms of Spanish, and will be poor more often than not. So me, I'm a little bit different from that. I've got a few. So I go to college, I go to Coe. I'm a double major. I'm trilingual. I speak Spanish, English, and French, and I read in Spanish, or not Spanish, in English and French. I haven't been formally Spanishly educated. But I'm also, I come from a low-income family, and I live in a low-income neighborhood, but that doesn't make me any more or any less Mexican. So, yeah. There is trouble, though, in simply making more shows and protagonists who are of color, because our society values this one story myth, which is simply the idea that one story from a marginalized group will suffice in explaining the entire group, and the idea of creating more stories won't be profitable, in the sense that people won't care to go see them, so they won't make any money. This also devalues people of color, and it makes children of color feel less confident in themselves in school, and it continues the never-ending cycle of disadvantage. So we're told, oh, only one of you is important, so the one that gets shown, the rest of us just kind of get thrown under the bus. Is that the phrase? I never know English idioms. I just don't know them. So what angers me, but mostly just saddens me, is how people will prefer to watch the same stories told over and over again. And I always call this like the Hemingway-ism, because there are a lot of books that are very much like Hemingway stories of, like, you know, there's a young man who, or an old man who used to be very good at something, and then he like stopped being good at it, and somehow he discovers it again, and boom, like, you know, he's a great person all over again. And we've heard that story a million times, but we still go see it because it's comfortable and it's something that a lot of us are assumed to be able to relate to. And so that's the issue, is that a lot of my white friends and white people that I've interacted with a lot, have told me that they simply don't know that they would be able to relate to a show or a movie with someone that doesn't necessarily look like them. And so, I mean, I have related to a lot of movies in my life because I love movies and I love TV shows. So it's possible to relate to someone without looking like them. And it's also, the fact is that me and a lot of my friends of color and all of my family, we've had to relate to movies where people don't look like us, and we've had to relate to shows where people don't look at us. So I think it's good to sort of split the task evenly, in the sense that, you know, we all watch each other's stories and we all learn a little bit about each other. So as it stands now, I don't really exist in hardly any stories. I always seem very unique, but there are actually a number of Latina French majors who are women that I've met, so I'm not totally unique. There are a lot of us. That's actually one of the large numbers at the, I think it's, yeah, at Madison, they have quite a number of Latina French majors who are doing their grad programs over there. So, you know, we exist. And a lot of my family doesn't exist either because my uncle, my Bill Caesar, he has a PhD in theoretical chemistry and he used to work for NASA. But he doesn't exist in TV. His wife, who is a Vietnamese woman, and that's honestly the only thing I have to say about her other than she's like, well, she's an optometrist and she's great, but she doesn't exist on TV because when was the last time anyone saw a Vietnamese woman on TV? And then their children, Mikey and Ivan, when was the last time anyone ever saw a Vietnamese Mexican mixed children on TV? And so, I mean, never happened. And even my mom works for the Boy Scouts and she's wonderful and she loves watching American Idol and she has trouble cooking and she doesn't exist on TV at all. And so my roommates also don't exist. It's me, who's born of Mexican immigrants. My roommate Danielle, she is Filipina. She was born in the Philippines. And then my roommate Whitney, who is black from Ohio. And then my other roommate Annabeth, who is white from Ames. And so I like to say we're the most racially diverse apartment in Coe's campus. I'm probably right. And we're always like giggling about rock music and we're talking about comic books and Whitney is a twin. And so we're a lot of things that people wouldn't expect. And that's simply because we aren't represented. So right now we are being erased and essentially eclipsed by the media. So right now if anyone is hearing, because I know my mom told me, she's like, oh, you're always saying there are too many white people on TV. And I'm like, no, what I'm saying is there are not enough people of color. Like the white people can stay on TV, they're gonna stay on TV anyways, you know? And like, you know, I like white stories, they're interesting. But there should also be a good mix of people of color. And so, the thing is that we don't have to be erased. And so essentially all that we have to do is get people to care about different stories so then that way we can get more stories, new stories, different stories. So if we just put a small limit on the stories that we've already heard, then we could hear new ones and understand each other a little bit better, and then we can love each other a little bit better. So I made a few, I'm actually running low on printer pages because I'm a creative writing major and I have a 74-page manuscript that I have to print off a few times. I made a list of some movies and TV shows that I could think of that feature protagonists of color. I'm pretty sure all of them are protagonists of color. So these are a few. Also, Google is the best of friends, and so I'll hand these out and we can probably hang them up around the church if anyone wants to, or take pictures of them or write down little notes and stuff. So yeah, so just watch TV and you're changing the world. Thanks.
Go ahead and invite you to come up here and feel free to ask questions.
How does the mic work?
I took my phone.
Oh, okay. Are we?
Well, there's two. Can you guys hear me? Is it okay?
Oh, yeah. That should be a good idea. Oh. There we go.
Okay.
Woo. Oh, I guess I can set this down.
I just recently completed a 40-hour domestic violence training program, and it dealt a lot with the LGBT and the immigrant population. There's no violence for domestic violence. There do seem to be laws where the place test immigrant victims where they get a U visa to stay
Yes.
in the country. So, a comment that I think we're making progress in
Yes.
some areas. I think we're getting more understanding. I think we're seeing more examples in the LGBT community, and we look at Sam's Champion and Robbins, and you know, those are really good role models.
Definitely. Good for you for volunteering like that.
Yeah,
I would just say that it's important to recognize that it's never really enough. I think it's always dangerous to say like, oh, we're making progress. This is good. We're doing a good job. I think we always need to continue to push further to find new ways to serve, to find new ways where we're failing and fix that.
I think there's a question over there first. My question is this. I have hope, but is it that we aren't really changing, it's just that we are dying off, and the newer generations are having a better open, you got to look at the political system, which is a little bit more aged, and you do see a lot of it that's ingrained into our structure. And, just recently a major church in America went through a 3-month study as to whether they should ordain gay pastors. And, they actually focused on why a gay person is organically that way, and it isn't a choice. So it was quite an education for a whole group of people, but I don't think any attitudes are changed.
Well, I can speak for the Catherine McCauley Center. I know that we have a significant amount of population of our tutors that are retired, that will come in and work with these populations every day and are very open-minded and help our students in a lot of ways. And so I think it's a little ageist to say that old people are not capable of change. I think we're all capable of change. So that would be my answer.
Well, I mean, I think I think the issues are still there, but they're done differently. So what I've noticed is that we've deviated a lot, and this is talking specifically about race issues and racism. We've deviated from the more overt forms. So there are less lynchings, there are less, there's less like actual pain, although some of the campaigns caused some Mexicans to be beat up, horribly so in a few states. But the overtness of it is gone, and now it's more systemic in the sense that it's hard to get a job if you have a specific sounding name. So, or it's hard to get an apartment in a specific location because people will think the property tax will go, I don't know, up or down. I can't remember which one it is. But so there are those ways in which things are still there. We've gotten rid of a lot of the atrocious, violent ones, but we've replaced it with almost diplomatic forms of discriminating against people.
Yeah, it's the age thing's tough because, I mean, right away I think of, one, my own grandmother is extremely accepting. She's awesome. Like, she understands entirely. There's some things she doesn't get, but like, it doesn't bother me in the slightest because she's supportive. She gets that. And frankly, like Bernie Sanders right now blows my mind. The fact that he can exist in this world as someone who clearly, I can't imagine he thought the way he does now 30 years ago, or when he was even my age. I can't imagine what his thought process was like. But the way he just refers to like us all as brothers and sisters, and not in this religious way, but in this like societal way that we're just all the same. And he doesn't bring up these, real just negative struggles, or he just talks about everyone in a positive light in a different way that I just very rarely hear from even our generation. And yeah, the age thing's tough just because I feel like our generation is increasingly talking about it in a negative light, increasingly talking about depression and suicidality and all these things. But I think, I don't know, sometimes I think like all the ages, all the generations together kind of like balance out to, I don't know, not too much negativity, not too much positivity, but like just enough to make some progress, such as like marriage equality and all these things that really are drastically improving.
This is a question for you, Pauline. When you look at television, would you also look at the ethnic representation in commercials, which, unlike shows like House of Cards, which are just fantasy, commercials are supposed to be real life?
Yeah, I do that actually. I used to when I was about, in my elementary years, I watched about, this is actually kind of awful to say, I watched about 7 hours of TV a day, and so I had nothing better to do. I had trouble making friends at home, but so I watched TV and I read books, that's all I did. And so I always looked at commercials and stuff, and I'd be that little kid in like 6th grade going, like, Madame Lugo, why is it we spend a year on American history and yet we never talk about people of color in history? And she's like, I don't know, Paulina. And I was like, well, we should fix that. And I was like 12, but Yeah, so I do look at the commercials in the sense that I have been focusing a little bit, mostly because I am Mexican, I focus on the Latino representation in commercials because typically we'll just be darker. There will be a number of family members and they'll speak minute Spanish, and so I'm like, oh, this is weird because I've interacted with a lot of Latino families and friends and stuff like that, and very few of us actually act that way. And so there's it's been hard to sort of show that blend of, yes, you know, we're letting Latinos into like TV and commercials, look, they're here, but then they always go on tropes. And so it's like, honestly, I would prefer if they just there's a very specific matron saint that we have in Mexico, whether you're religious or not, you have the saint all over your house. And most of the houses that I've been to have had this shrine just in the living room. And if they just put that shrine in the living room and had the people acting however they would, I'd think it was a pretty decent representation of Mexican life. But, well, they don't know that, so, I mean, what do we do? You had a question?
Yes, I think of Harvey Melvin and Matthew Shepard, and I wonder if the homicide rate against the authorities is higher.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't looked into it too much on my own, just maybe I'm a little afraid to. But yeah, I don't know if I have too much to say about it, but I mean, I think it just stems from that, like I talked about before, that reliance on chosen family, like the idea that queer people start to rely on friends so much more, ends up putting them in these kinds of situations of substance abuse, drug abuse, and all those things. And not by their own choice, but sometimes that's just the only culture where they're accepted, the only group of people they're accepted. And I think if we can break those boundaries, like get people back into the families and just get them evolving as family members in the same way that everyone else is in the world, I think these really dangerous clashes might stop happening quite as severely. I mean, Matthew Shepard is especially is just one of those instances where he was not, nothing he went through seems like it was because he was gay, but he was just in a bad situation. Or a lot of, that's the case with a lot of gay teens that are killed nowadays, that they're not killed because of homophobia as much as they're just killed because they have a drug deal that went wrong or something like this. And I think that's where our focus kind of needs to be as we go forward with the homicide side of things.
Well, I have mixed emotions between thinking about people and their needs individually and everyone being very unique, and also looking at groups, because there are some characteristics and some prejudices that we need to address and be sensitive to. But I was wondering if any of you felt that the group identity thing might actually be hurtful. I mean, we have so many groups that are not pure groups, but they're groups that are, they're individuals that are married, or their parents have been married to other groups, and then we're subdividing groups like, Mexicans are no longer Caucasians, and they really are Caucasians, but they don't want to. They want to group whites as whites, and Mexicans as Mexicans, and indigenous Indians as indigenous Indians, and Indians, for all kinds of different groups. So I'm talking too long, but anyway, is there any problem in any of your minds with this group identification thing?
I have so many problems with the group identification thing. It's mostly because I think the way that we've addressed social justice in the past has always been very one-sided. And actually, late nights when I can't fall asleep, I will make diagrams in my mind of how I can more easily, diagnose, or not diagnose, but like present the issues that we have with like one form social justice, which I just coined, and so. Paulina Harrison, trademark. So what I've noticed is that feminism is always like, it's considered just women. And so that just women often is white women, and then there's its own branch of women of color, and then there's queer women of color, and trans women of color. And it just keeps going, trans women of color with disabilities and stuff like that. But I think it's important to have those various, I don't want to call them subgroups, but that's what a lot of people refer to them as, that we deal with these issues in ways that are very one-sided, but we as people are not one-sided. And in fact, I would go all the way down the tier to women of color, and then there's sort of like, then you'd bring in class issues, you'd bring in like, education, privilege, and stuff like that. And so I'd be fluctuating around the web of identities. And so I think the more we get into inclusivity, and I know our feminist group on campus that we're actually all a part of is very intersectional, and that's actually our theme for our performance that we're doing is intersectionality. And so we're talking about how the various forms of identities intersect. And so we have stories about white students with mental illness. We have stories about Hispanic queer people. And so we try to include as many people as possible and try not to forget anyone. So I think that's where third wave feminism is going. So we're slowly but surely trying to make our big group include all of the subgroups, quote unquote. Yes.
So my question was along Ron's lines as well, because you had indicated you think it's important for people to identify with the LGBT community. Why not just identify as an individual? It seems to me as soon as we start carving people up into distinct communities, we're saying we're different. Why not just be an individual like any other?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't know, I hear that point a lot, and I entirely understand, because I don't hold it against my friend that he doesn't identify with the queer community. The problem comes up with he essentially, or people like him, essentially end up creating the stigma on the queer community that we're like something to stay away from. That it's a bad thing to associate with the queer community. And my point of view is that if we do all just, fact is, if we're all LGBT, we're all LGBT. Like, we are in the same community. To not identify with it, it's a lot of that does stem from some kind of internalized homophobia. So them being uncomfortable with queerness in some way themselves. Maybe they don't express it, but a lot of those people who don't associate with them, it comes from a place of an offensive nature, essentially, just because maybe they're transphobic, but even though there are plenty of gay men, I don't know how many queer people you all know, but there are a lot of gay men out there that kind of take over the movement, and that's why marriage equality was the big push for change right now, because gay men were really concerned with it. But it's not that like we can't label ourselves and just like be individuals, but the idea of distracting from kind of a group effort sometimes can be harmful. I'm not saying it always is.
I get that one also. Yeah, I hear that a lot in different words. It's funny because a lot of the identities issues often hear a lot of the similar questions, they just have different words. But I hear this with the colorblind argument that, effectively we want to, if we don't see color, then those injustices don't exist. But that's not always the case in the sense that whenever people will always come up to me and they're like, oh, I don't see race. You're like, you're cool. And I was like, that's great, but you didn't tell that to your white friends, you told that to me. So clearly you do, and that's okay, It's okay that you see race. The important thing is that you don't make assumptions about people based on the race. And so there's a sort of, if you just wipe it away, it's essentially wiping away the injustices of history and the injustices that are going on. And so that's the issue, is that I always think that it's better to discuss race. As uncomfortable as it is for most of the globe to discuss race, we should do it because then that way we'll understand each other better. And that's my whole thing.
I think just briefly, maybe we'll end on this note, but to reiterate that in terms of when we're talking about equality and social justice, an individual versus the group, just like Paulina said, to reiterate this on more general terms, it's important to realize that an individual can be an individual, but individuals are not all the same and individuals are not all equal. And so by assuming that all individuals are equal, you're perpetuating those systems of oppression. So it's important, I think that's part of where the grouping comes in, is to sort of see the ways that individuals are similar, the ways that different individuals face problems in our society, and then better address them. So it's a difficult balancing act, I think. And like, I'm 21, I'm finishing my bachelor's degree, I don't have it all figured out, but I think we're trying.
What terrific representative